Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. It is the 22nd of April. I hope that you all had wonderful Easters, despite, in the UK at least, the kind of weird and changing weather of April. We all woke up on Monday, the 12th of April, the first day in the UK that we were getting some of our freedoms back and we could go to outdoor restaurants and cafes and sit down for food and drink. And what did we wake up to? A snowfall. Here in Oxford, we were completely blanketed in snow when we woke up in the morning. It was absolutely extraordinary, but with great British reserve and bonhomie, most people continued to be out there in the freezing cold to enjoy their newfound freedoms, and it was brilliant to see you all. So I hope that you have been enjoying your time wherever you are in the world. I hope you're all safe and well. I had a great Easter break. It was my little one's 5th birthday. It was my, as you know, many of you kind of very kindly commented on the Facebook page, my 40th birthday. Thank you so much indeed for your kind comments. And so I feel much older and wiser now. And, you know, finally the world, it makes sense, not sadly. But in the meantime, I've been really enjoying the questions that you have been sending through. And it's great to have another opportunity to chat through some of those questions with you and think about what our answers might be. So we're going to kick off with two questions that were actually asked live last time over the chat, but obviously we didn't have the chat function enabled. God knows what I managed to do, but I caught up with all the comments that you were making afterwards. So thank you very much indeed for those. And yes, kind of probably all the comments along the lines of kind of the prof's mucked up, can't handle the technology all over again were merited. So they were asked live last time. And the first was from Alexis Brown saying, I'm sure I've read somewhere that the ancient Greeks didn't have a word for blue. Is that correct? Now, this is really interesting, Alexis. This was building on the back of a conversation that we were having in response to a question last time about ancient colours and where they came from, and how the ancients made colours out of the most bizarre things, and sometimes quite poisonous substances, sometimes quite yucky substances. And we talked about a number of colours that were named after or very much linked to the product that they were made from. Now, the blue is a really interesting issue, and this kind of sense of the Greeks didn't have a word for blue, or indeed potentially couldn't see blue, actually links back through to the 19th century when writers were trying to work out why words for things that we see as blue were what they saw as confused in the ancient Greek vocabulary and in ancient Greek literature. And particularly, it was a word glaukos in the ancient Greek terminology. Glaukos, and that's used in ancient Greek literature to talk about the sea and the sky, so things that we might conceive of as being blue. But then equally, it's used of eyes, okay, yeah, perhaps, stars, the moon, grapes, bronze, and the list goes on. I think even a willow tree is described as glaukos at one point. So suddenly the glaukos becomes this very confusing word. And one of the responses was to say, well, the Greeks just were colorblind. They couldn't see blue. That's the problem. That's why they were getting confused between bronze and sky, which obviously aren't the same color to us. But actually, approaches have moved on quite significantly since then. And we know, of course, that the Greeks did have blue because blue was a colour they used quite a lot of and made it. And for example, painting their temples. The ancient Greeks liked to paint their temples in bright red, bright green, bright blue, along with other things. So it's involved a lot of work in trying to rethink how the ancients might have actually understood and appreciated and wanted to talk about colour. And one of my PhD students actually at the moment at the University of Warwick, Jill, is writing her PhD on the perceptions of colour in the ancient Greek world. And she has an entire chapter on glaukos, this problem of glaukos, and the fact that glaukos seems to be a colour which is not tethered to a hue, i.e. to a colour as we would understand it, or to an original pigment or an original thing that it's made out of. And instead, it's about a kind of quality of colour, another kind of quality of colour. In this case, is very often associated with gleaming or flashing bright or shiny, that kind of aspect of something. So we can have a gleaming sky or a gleaming sea or gleaming eyes or gleaming bronze, etc. And so we have to move away from how we conceive of colour, which is very much based around the Newtonian kind of colour wheel, and actually get back to a much kind of more, in some ways, advanced and three-dimensional understanding of how words can be used to describe different properties of colour. So brilliant, Alexis, thank you so much for that. Absolutely brilliant to bring that in. And then Linda Montague asked live last time, is it a fact that the so-called Justinian Plague lasted about 200 years? So again, we were coming out of this, I think, about a question talking about plagues and epidemics in the past, and pandemics in the past, and what potentially we can learn from them. And the Plague of Justinian is an interesting one, 541 to 549 AD, so only 8 years, not 200 years. But the Justinian Plague is really considered to be the first of a series of 15 to 18 waves of plague that actually went on through until the 8th century AD. The Justinian Plague being the kind of the first of that, and the last one being the so-called Plague of Naples. And while we can't definitively trace the kind of actual strains of virus that were responsible for all of these plagues, it's thought that there was a connection, and this was like we are seeing with COVID-19 and a series of waves of different variants and strains develop. This actually gripping the Mediterranean and indeed Central Asia and kind of moving backwards and forwards in different waves over a considerable period of time, hundreds of years. And for me, this is kind of one of those lessons that we can learn. Now, obviously, the ancient example, a lot less hygiene, obviously no vaccinations, so we are much better equipped in the modern world to combat. But at the same time, the kind of ways in which viruses behave, we can see from this ancient example that actually was present and around and changing and varying and having an impact and effect over an extraordinarily long time period. So Linda, thank you for that. Now, Linda, you have also sneaked in with a second question this week. I couldn't resist this one because clearly also since the 12th of April, if people have not been sitting outside with their newfound freedom in cafes and restaurants, they have been piling in to one place above all else, and that is the hairdresser. Yes, apparently bookings are going through the roof. I know people who have taken, it's going to take them more than a month to get an appointment to go to the hairdresser, and people are talking about the sheer mountains of hair chopping that is going to be going on around the country and has been going on since the 12th of April, and what we should do with all this hair that will be accumulated. Maybe we could create some kind of anti-COVID statue with it going forward. But kind of what Linda's question, and in fact, it was actually your daughter asking about this, was talking about ancient cosmetic and beauty routines and kind of then thinking about body hair removal. And then Carolyn Nicklin, you were asking, I think because everyone's got hairdressers on the brain, specifically about haircuts and hairdressing. So clearly we've all got kind of body cosmetic beauty upkeep on the brain as we go forward. Now, do you know what? I'm going to stop at this point and just say, I think I've done it again. I think there's another problem with the comments, because although I can see all the notifications that you guys are, or of different people that are watching, and I can even see your reactions coming up, I can't see any comments. So I'm presuming that I've gone and done something completely mad again, or Facebook has changed its settings and I haven't worked out what I'm supposed to do to be able to get your comments back. But kind of, I'm not seeing any comments. I'm only seeing whether you're watching, and now I'm seeing a whole host of reactions flurrying up, so I'm presuming that there are comments which I just can't see again. So once again, technology and Michael have parted company, and now I'll have to trust you lot to be good and not too naughty on the chat while I can't keep an eye on it, but don't worry, I will be catching up with it afterwards. Anyway, so Carolyn Nicklin has been asking about haircuts. Were there traditional haircuts for men and women, and were they important enough to be written about? Yes is the short answer, but we're coming back for more. And then Linda Montague, through your daughter, asking about, did women in ancient Greece pay attention to excess body hair? Did they paint their nails? Did they use beauty products in the same way as we do today? And was male grooming more prominent in their society? So these are all absolutely superb questions, and we're going to try and take a quick walk through the park of Roman beauty, if one was to walk into a Roman beauty salon, if they had such things. So they didn't, I don't think, really. Kind of what would be on offer, what would be on the menu. So let's start with haircuts. Now, haircuts are important, absolutely crucial, because your haircut, just as to a certain extent today, but perhaps even more so in the ancient world, in the ancient Roman world, said something about you as a person. Now, we have to distinguish slightly between the traditions in sculpture and the day-to-day reality. Right? And obviously we are much better evidenced about the sculptural traditions because the sculptures survive. We don't have many photos surviving from ancient Rome of what people really look like. But we can do a little bit of comparison when we get things like painting to see that actually there's quite a lot of overlap between these different sculptural traditions. And on the one hand, particularly in the Republican era of Rome, you've got an emphasis on what's called verism, truth. That translates as, but it's sort of, it's not really truth. It's a desire to see particularly leading politicians and sensible figures of the Roman state looking mature, and with good authority and expertise and wisdom. They want to have what in Roman terms would be called auctoritas, severitas. And so you get these rather quite, we would see sort of ugly portraits of people like Julius Caesar. If you think Julius Caesar, that kind of balding portrait of the man, kind of, they're not trying to airbrush him in any way, shape or form. Tons of wrinkles, balding head, kind of, he's showing him as he is, maybe not, but actually what they're playing up to is this idea that statesmen should look old, mature, wizened, perhaps slightly balding around the edges. Then occasionally you get a sort of complete left field thrown in, which is someone like Pompey in the end of the kind of Republic. Now, he's a man who wants to have his cake and eat it because he wants to be the old, wise Roman man, establishment figure. So when you see sculptures of him, his face is kind of slightly plump, but, kind of wizened with frowns and wrinkles and very experienced. But he also wants to have the lion-hearted courage, macho image of some great figure like Alexander the Great. So he gives himself the hairstyle of Alexander the Great, which is, a big head of flaming curly hair. So you get this rather odd double effect of old, wizened, frowned, wrinkled face with big lock of young, youthful, bushy hair. And to us, it looks fairly ridiculous. When you get into the imperial period, again, haircuts say something about you. Augustus, very straight down the line, very simple haircut. Here's a man whose figure and image was created to reflect someone who didn't go in for all that lavishness and exuberance that had cost the end of the Republic. Although, of course, he liked a bit of luxury here or there. But a straight down the line haircut with just a fleck of Alexander the Great about him. And one of the things I love about time I spent years ago working in German universities in Munich was that they spend, and across different German academic classics departments and archaeology departments, they spend an awful lot of time looking at the very detailed specifics of Augustus's hairstyling. And it changes just ever so slightly with a flick and a curl here and a flick or a curl there in his official portraiture during the time of his reign, as he attempts to be just a little bit more Alexander the Great, or a little bit more kind of his severitas, auctoritas, etc., just with an occasional curl or two. Then when you get into the kind of later imperial periods and later emperors, you get to see fashions and styles changing dramatically with an era. And you get what I think is one of the most extraordinary hairstyles of all under the Flavian emperors, which is when women's hairstyles went big and curly. So you wanted them as high up on your head as you possibly could. And this was a demonstration, obviously, of the time and effort that you could, as a rich Roman woman, afford to spend having your hair styled for you by your many slaves into an enormous and totally impractical hairdo up on the top of your head. So there's lots of different things that we can tell about hairstyles, and definitely there were hairstyles of the day to aspire to, the fashion, the high elite hairstyles, and different kind of trajectories, if you like, for men and women. Now, what about that other hair? What about body hair? Right, well, so yes, we, from the evidence that we have, Roman women did spend a huge amount of time removing body hair in all sorts of different ways, shaving, plucking, stripping using a kind of resin paste, as well. So that was a kind of regular practice. Men would do it too, but there was a balance point. So if you had too much hair as a man, it was thought to take away from your civilized nature, particularly if you were an elite. But if you took away too much hair, you were obviously behaving in an effeminate manner. So there was a very delicate balancing line for the man to walk in terms of their hair removal practices. Thinking about nail painting. Now, we don't really have any evidence of Roman women painting their nails, but they did trim them, obviously, and that would be an important thing to do. And the thing that kind of they really did go in for was this kind of long eyelashes. Definitely you need good long eyelashes. They were quite a fan of the monobrow. So you see Roman women actually sort of putting in eyebrows rather than taking them away. Good heavy eyebrow was what you were looking for. And then there's this thing about makeup and skin tone. So what it seems to be, again, in the elite circles here is we're looking for an elite woman to show that she doesn't have to spend a lot of time outside in the warm Mediterranean climate because she doesn't do manual labour. So a pale skin was really what people were looking for. And how did they achieve that pale skin? Well, I mean, famously, we know about people like Cleopatra who bathed in ass's milk, and this is supposed to have acted as a kind of chemical peel. But then also we're looking at all sorts of weird and wonderful ingredients that were brought in to try and make women's skin that little bit whiter, that little bit paler. And that included lead. Right, coming from on kind of derivatives of white lead, right? Even though they knew it was poisonous and kind of not very good for you, absolutely desperate to use. And that, along with a whole series of things, most of which would make your stomach turn to think about putting them on your own skin. But it could anything be vinegar, marrow, honey, sweat from sheep or gladiators. That was supposed to bring a good essence of fertility, of course, as well. So you could have all of these sorts of things that would pale your skin, and then potentially put just a little bit of rouge just to give that healthy glow as well underneath. So lots going on in the beauty pageant product kind of placement world of the ancient Romans, both for men and for women. So men, it was mainly about potentially perfume use and hair management, but kind of makeup was considered a step too far. Brilliant. Thank you so much all for your questions. Loving this emphasis as we reflect the modern in our questions about the ancient world. Thank you also for your kind comments that have been coming through about the Italy's Invisible City series that has been reshown recently on BBC4. Thank you, Sophie Chessman-Smith, for your thoughts on that. I'm so glad you liked it. You were asking whether we need, you're saying we need more of this. Are there any plans? Very sadly, no. BBC's got no more plans to make any more Invisible Cities series at the moment. So that is a great shame, but hopefully you can enjoy both Italy's Invisible Cities, which are all on iPlayer, and Rome's Invisible City is coming back onto screens on, I think it is the 24th, so just a couple of days' time. So we've had some great questions there, and I now take a quick moment to think about some of the things that are going on in the classical world and around the classical world. So kind of the news of things that have been found underground. From Gloucestershire Live, they found Roman remains in Gloucester's King's Square, like just as part of a project to revamp the square. Absolutely brilliant. Then from Time Team. Now, Time Team are returning to our screens. They've kind of crowdsourced, got a YouTube channel. They're coming back in force on YouTube, and they're coming back to excavate a Roman villa near Broughton Castle. So fingers crossed that will be absolutely brilliant, as I'm sure it will be. And then, of course, you may have seen this in Egypt. Two things coming out of Egypt, which I think are absolutely brilliant at the moment. One is that they've been transferring a lot of the amazing collections from the current Museum of Antiquities in Egypt to the brand new one, the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. And literally there has been a parade through the streets of the remains of the great pharaohs of old as they've moved. 22 mummies, 18 kings and 4 queens have been kind of taken 3 miles sort of down the street to their new final resting place. I would have absolutely loved to have been there to see that. And it reminds me of when in Athens they were moving stuff from the old Acropolis Museum that was actually up on top of the Acropolis to the new Acropolis Museum, which is down by the side of the Acropolis. And the way they did this was to construct 2 big cranes, and they literally attached the ancient statues to crane number 1, took it up out of the museum up on the top of the Acropolis, swung the crane round completely up, probably 150 feet, 200 feet up in the air, and then deposited it down to then be attached to the second crane that picked it up again, swung it round to bring it to the new Acropolis Museum, and then brought it into the new Acropolis Museum in place. So for days on end, you could be walking around the Acropolis of modern-day Athens, look up into the sky and see these antiquities literally flying above your head. Then the Guardians also covered the discovery of a whole new golden city, lost golden city down near Luxor in Egypt. And the ubiquitous Zavi Hawass is in charge of this mission to uncover this new city lost beneath the sands. City 3,000 years old, dating to the reign of Amenhotep III. So absolutely extraordinary finds. We can expect to hear tons more coming out from this place. So kind of those are some of the great things that have been happening. Of course, Scarborough has been in the news as well. This is a kind of a Roman villa unearthed on a building site, first of its kind ever found. This looks really, really interesting. Historic England are saying that this type of layout of Roman villa has never been seen in Britain. So this is really exciting. And then again in Salamis in Greece, they've been releasing some more of the results that we first showed you in Ancient Invisible Cities Athens for BBC Two back in 2018, where they found submerged remains of the port walls of Salamis, where they think the Athenian fleet was in harbour before going out to meet the Persians in 480 BC. Absolutely brilliant. What's going on around the world to take part in relation to the ancients? Well, we've mentioned the Italy's Invisible Cities series on iPlayer. Rome's Invisible City, 24th of April, this Saturday on BBC 4. We wanted to mention something coming from Warwick. The Warwick Classics Network, the outreach arm of our department, has launched its Ancient Worlds Day for 2021, which is about expanding horizons. It's going to be on the 16th of June between 1:30pm and 3:45pm live, mainly aimed at school audiences, but do join in and come and listen to. I'll be giving a live talk alongside a number of others, and then there'll be a whole slew of pre-recorded videos about a whole range of topics related to the A-level and GCSE syllabuses for classical civilization and ancient history that will kind of be kind of behind that you can tune in for. So do come and join us on the 16th of June, and also get involved if you're in the Coventry area, potentially linked to a primary school in Coventry. Come and be part of our Roman Coventry project, which is kicking off for Coventry City of Culture Year that we're running as well. And there'll be lots of lessons in a box that you can take and do at home or do in your school as well. So do get in touch with us if you're interested in that. Classics for All have just announced the return of the online Harrow Summer School for 2021. That will be happening in August. And that's focusing on teaching Latin, ancient Greek and ancient history. The British School of Athens, another favourite place of mine, is doing a virtual course for school teachers. So this will be for free. So do have a look at that. And again, that's linked to the school syllabuses, GCSE and A-level for the different ancient world topics. And also they're doing a Byzantine material culture and topography course as well. So you can get involved in that. That's free and online. Close to my heart here in Oxford, the University Faculty of of Classics has launched the David Rayburn Prize. Now, David Rayburn was an esteemed classicist, very sadly passed away some months ago. He was one of the first people who kind of really inspired me to want to take on classics to university level and beyond, and was an absolutely superb figure, not just in the translation, but in the performance of ancient Greek. His voice was absolutely astounding, listening to him reciting Homer or tragedy, and he was directing me in one of the first plays I ever did in ancient Greek back when I was 18 years old. And now the prize has been launched, which is an exciting new performance competition for young people across the UK. The competition's open to any participant aged 11 to 18, and the judges will be looking for powerful, creative and exciting interpretations of ancient material. So get your thinking caps on, get your entries in. Lytham St Anne's Classical Association bursaries are also out there in order to attend the Jacked Classics and Ancient History Summer School. So think about applying for one of those bursaries. And then tons of podcasts out there at the moment, from History Hack, History Hit, The Rest is History, The Ancient World is Everywhere. They're all linked on our Facebook page, so do get involved and have a look at some of those. Have we got time for a couple more questions? Yes, we have. So I wanted to come over because, again, I know I'm favouring particular question askers this week, but I have been meaning to get to answer your questions for quite some time. Carolyn Nicklin, you asked many moons ago, and I haven't got back to this question. We have had a Brexit, Scottish independence, Catalan independence, etc. Did any part of the Roman Empire try to leave, and did any succeed? Now, before I jump into this, I'm going to have to take a swig of my tea. As you can hear, I'm getting slightly hoarse. Hang on. Right. Yes, and yes, Carolyn. Particularly with the Roman Empire, and there were tons of times the different parts of the Roman Empire tried to break away. So, if you imagine Rome coming to what we might kind of call a monopoly of power in the central Mediterranean by the end of the 2nd century BCE. So that's the kind of end of the Carthaginian Wars, Rome's triumph over Carthage, Rome's takeover of Greece through into the 1st century BC. It's really got the Mediterranean under its sway by then. But obviously it then expands further out in terms of its land mass conquests through into Britain, obviously, Gaul, into North Africa, but also east. And the big push east is under Tiberius, but then there's a kind of a certain amount of retrenchment and consolidation under Hadrian, building Hadrian's Wall, obviously saying these are our borders, and kind of touring the borders of the Roman Empire. And then after that, it's a little bit less kind of dramatic in its expansion and contraction, but that doesn't mean that bits aren't breaking away. So, for instance, we think about the rebellions in Britain. Boudica. Think about the Judean wars, when parts of Judea try to revolt successfully for periods of time before they're kind of pushed and enforced back in to the Roman Massif. Think about Palmyra, actually, as an outpost on the very edge of the Roman Empire that we talk about in many different ways as a caravan city that was a real kind of trading post between Rome in the west and Central Asia and through to China. So we have surviving in Palmyra in the graves there, lots of examples of Chinese silk. Obviously, we talk about Palmyra today in a very different context because of its recent destructions that have been visited on it. But that isn't the first time Palmyra has actually been destroyed, because in the 3rd century AD, Palmyra and its queen Zenobia actually decided to rebel against the Roman Empire and declare themselves independent. And the Romans came in and trashed the place in order to kind of force Palmyra back into the fold. So kind of, lots of different examples of bits breaking away, and most often, if they were within that kind of main area of the Roman world post-Hadrian, being forced back in, but also examples of vast swathes of territory temporarily being conquered, and then the borders of the Roman Empire being sort of rolled back and leaving them to the then neighbouring empire, particularly in the east, the Parthian Empire. And of course, it wasn't just the Romans that kind of had this happen to them. All the big empires had breakaway states. So famously, post the conquest of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, his empire is broken up into different mini-empires that are controlled by his generals initially, and then the royal families descended from those generals. And the Seleucid Empire, which covers what is today Turkey going through into Central Asia, the biggest kind of sprawling landmass, which had previously been the Persian Empire. You see lots of breakaway republics in there. So Greco-Bactria, one of the areas really in Central Asia, kind of around modern-day Afghanistan, that breaks away and tries to be independent for a while until the ruler kind of turns up very slowly from the other end of the empire to force it back in. But then you also see the state of Parthia break away and actually do it so successfully that they take over the entire empire and morph into the much larger Parthian Empire, which then becomes that empire that sits on the border with the Roman world. So sometimes breakaways could be very, very successful indeed. Great, I'm so glad I got that question in. And then also, Rebecca Louise, we are running out of time, but I owe you an answer to your question. It's been sitting, waiting, and I've been desperate to answer it for so long. Odysseus is described as weeping in the Odyssey. I explained to my students that weeping was not really a sign of weakness, but of emotion. When did weeping become a sign of weakness and perceived femininity? Kind of really, really, really good question, Rebecca. I want to answer this in more detail, but the very brief answer is it's something quite interesting to do with how around about the time of the Persian Wars, early 5th century BCE, we start to get this characterization of the barbarian Persian other as an effeminate character, in which particularly Aeschylus's Persians, you see the Persian king sort of weeping in distress at his victory, at his defeat. And you start to see that weeping as becoming a sign of weakness and perceived femininity rather than an absolutely perfectly fine example of what great heroes like Odysseus and slightly more kind of moaning heroes like Achilles also do. So Rebecca, thank you so much for that great question. Thank you all for your fantastic questions. I haven't mentioned that it's prize week. Yes, it is indeed prize week, and the prize this time, if I can quickly grab my notes to find who the prize is, we are going with Lee Edmond for his brilliant question coming from his school students asking about the origins of tragedy. So Lee, I'm sorry we didn't get that in right at the outset of our half hour, but get in touch and claim your prize with us through the Facebook page or via email, and we will get that out to you. So thank you so much. Our time is almost up. I will try desperately to fix this comments issue for next time. When is going to be next time? It's going to be Thursday, the 6th of May, so in 2 weeks' time, at 5 p.m. I will be here, hopefully being able to see your comments, and I hope very much that you will be here then too. Keep your questions coming in either to the Facebook page or via email to michaelscottacademic@gmail.com. And in the meantime, have a really wonderful next couple of weeks. Stay safe, stay well, enjoy your trips to the hairdressers and to the pubs and to the outdoor restaurants and to the beauty parlours. And we'll see you all soon. Take care.